Hey, folks, I'm Dan. I have a story to tell you. I was thinking about this just now, decided this is the one I'm going to share. Um, so here we go. It was 3 a.m. when I woke up. It was to go to the bathroom because as you age, that happens. There's seems every night at 3 a.m. I have to wake up. So I walked out of the bedroom and around the corner towards the bathroom, and I looked out the picture window, which looked out the front of our apartment we lived in, and the sun was up, and it was beautiful. You see, we lived in Alaska, in the mountains just north of Anchorage, where we ran a camp and retreat center. And we lived on a lake. We had our own private lake there. And I had been waiting since November of the year before to go kayaking on that lake. You see, we arrived there after it had frozen over. Matter of fact, when we got there, the lake was already frozen over and people were ice skating on it. And it was pretty cool because it got cold before it snowed, so the ice was clear and you could skate on it and actually look through it and see down into the lake. It was kind of cool. But I wanted to kayak it, and I'd been waiting. It was June 15th. That's this day. June 15th, 2013. That's how long I had waited. And you might be wondering why? Is because the lake was covered with ice for so long. That's the day that the ice went out on the lake. That's what we call it there when the ice goes out. And there I was. I had to remember I got up to go to the bathroom and took care of that. And I went and got back in bed and I was thinking, I'm going kayaking today because what I saw was a lake clear of ice. You see, 12 hours before, it was still covered over with a sheet of ice and white. And I was starting to get concerned because we had a camp coming up that week and and we had a lake covered with ice. It's summer camp with a frozen lake. Not too cool. Even the big water trampoline had been sitting on our beach for weeks. All the boats were out. Everything was ready to go. The life jackets were on all the hooks. And we'd been mowing grass for a month, and the lake was still froze over. So I'm in bed, and I'm thinking, I'm going to kayak today. And I couldn't go back to sleep. So about an hour later at 4 a.m., I got up. I shook my wife and woke her up, and she's like, "What is it?" And well, she didn't say it like that. But anyway, she was wondering why I woke her up. And I said, "I'm going to go kayaking." And she goes, "Okay, be safe. Take a radio," which was our policy. Whenever we went out by ourselves, we always had a little handheld radio that we would take with us. Any of the staff would do that, even if they were in groups. It was a large facility, and that's what we did. So I got ready. I got dressed, put on my shorts, put on my kayak and shoes in case my feet got wet, put on my fleece because it was still 4 or 5, well, 4 in the morning at this point. And even though it had been in the 70s most of the time, it was down in the 50s now. Not warm, but comfortable. It's Alaska, remember. If the sun's out, you're good. So I get dressed and I get myself some fresh made peanut butter cookies that my wife had made the night before. I made a fresh pot of coffee, filled up my thermos, grabbed my little Bible and my radio, and headed to the beach. Well, there was a trail from our apartment, which was underneath one of the cabins, but we had a beautiful view of the lake from there. And I went down to where we kept our kayaks because we kept our personal kayaks separate from the camp kayaks because, well, they were our personal kayaks and kids get kind of carried away. So I got my boat in the water and it was so nice. The water was crystal clear. There was no wind. The sun was coming up. It was just absolutely beautiful. The sky was clear, a few puffy clouds, and there was no sound. Nothing. No sound at all, which is pretty normal for that time of day, especially when 4 to 5 a.m. was real quiet. That's also when we had to watch out for wildlife too. So I get in the kayak, and this is a sit-in kayak, by the way, and I get myself down inside of it. I've had this kayak for several years, so it's not like I'm a novice kayaker. And I get set up. I have my kayaking life vest on, so it's comfortable to paddle in. I got my nice paddles out, and I'm just excited. And It's so flat. The lake is like glass. So I launch out from the dock and I'm paddling, and it's just amazing. And I'm just looking around at creation and just blown away. And then the birds are starting to move. And we had a pair of loons on the lake, and I could see them way over on the other side, and I could hear their call. Loons are really loud. Oh, and then there was the Arctic terns that would dive bomb us constantly if we got near their nesting area. There was a little island on one end of the lake. We call it Bird Poop Island because it stunk so bad. It's where all the waterfowl and birds would nest on that little grassy island. And the Arctic terns had their nests there. If you got close, they would. I don't know how a little 1 pound bird could be so frightening and loud, but man, when they're hovering over you and their little tongue sticks out and they're kind of freaky looking. And they came back every year from Antarctica. Blows me away. So back to my story. So I head towards Poop Island because I hadn't been there. I wanted to see what it was. I knew the terns were out there, and I'm going that direction, and I'm out in the middle of this lake. Now, this is a good-sized lake. I don't know the acreage of it, but it's a good 1/4 mile across all the way, and it's kind of shaped like an hourglass, so it would come into a neck and open to a whole other section. And on that other section, it was our only neighbors, and their house was behind an island that was way on the other side, so we couldn't even see them, and they couldn't see us. They were great people, though. So I'm kind of in the middle of the lake at this point, and I'm looking up at where we live. And I realize this is so cool. I haven't seen it from this vantage point before. So as excited as I am, I grab my radio and I radio for my wife. It was kind of stupid. She's still asleep, and this is like 5 a.m. And she finally answers like, "Becky, come in, Becky. Becky, She goes, "What?" in her sleepy voice. And I go, "I'm out on the lake. Come look at me." So she stumbles into the living room, and I can see her through the window with the radio up, and she waves at me. And she turns around, and then I hear her say, "Be careful. I'm going back to bed." And I go, "I will." So I put my radio down, and I paddle out to the other end of the lake, which is much wider and bigger. It's closer to a little over 1/4 mile across there. And it's just flat. It's perfectly flat, like glass. I can look down and I can see the bottom, and it's 10 to 12 feet deep there. But the water is just so clear, and I reached my hand down into it, and it was freezing cold. Remember, ice was on this lake 6 hours ago. So I get out there, and I stop myself, and because if I didn't, I would have just kept floating because it was just so flat and there was no wind. And I pull my paddles up and throw my little elastic strap over them like you're supposed to. And I get my thermos out and I pour myself a fresh cup of coffee. And I was so proud of my little Stanley thermos. And it was so good, and it was so beautiful and peaceful. And I'm reaching down for my bag of cookies, and a bug flew into my ear. I could hear it. Zzz. And you know what I did? I bent my head over, and I started slapping the back of my ear to get the bug out, like I've done in the past. And I just kept going over. Rolled the kayak over right there, out towards the middle of the lake. 6 hours after the ice went out. I remember hitting that ice cold water. That it was quite a shock. It wasn't my first time. I'd fallen out of a boat while rafting. Well, I didn't fall out. I got knocked out on the Matanuska River about 5 years before, and that's where the water just came out from under the glacier. It was cold, but then I had a dry suit on. But I remember that feeling on my face when I went under, how freezing cold that was. And that was this feeling again. It was ice cold, shockingly cold. I popped to the surface. Of course, I had my vest on. And the first thing I do is I think, well, crap, how did this happen? And I'm floating there next to the boat, and the boat is also full of water. Now, I've trained, I know how to get back up on a kayak when you roll it. And I suddenly realize I'm getting so cold so fast, I can't. I'm afraid I can't get on the boat. And I'm also afraid if I take too much time and try to get back in the boat, I might go hypothermic, exhausting myself. So I look at option 2, and that's what I'm doing at this point. What are my options here? I look one direction away from the camp, and the shore is closest on that side. I'm a little past halfway, about 2/3 of the way across this lake. And it's cold, and I'm trying to think this as quickly as I can to decide what do I do. And I push the boat out of the way finally. I realize I can't get back in the boat. I can't drag it with me. It's on a lake. It's not going anywhere. And the direction I look is close, but there's nothing there. You see, if I had swum that way, it would be the shorter swim. But once I got to shore, there were no trails around the lake from that side. I would have to bushwhack through brush. And it happened to be the time of year that bears were coming through there. We had actually seen brown bears on that side of the lake in their journey to the creek where the salmon would soon be. And I just thought, no, I can't go there. That's because once I get there, I have to walk more than a mile around the end of the lake to get anywhere. So before I did this, and I forgot this whole part of the story, I grabbed my radio. It was floating in the little bag next to me. I reached it up and I tried calling my wife for help. Nothing. I tried calling again for help. Nothing. And then I realized I'd put my radio in a cheap little sandwich bag instead of a good freezer bag. So if you're ever in this situation, you need to put a radio in a bag to keep it waterproof. Don't use the cheap sandwich bags. They always leak. This one was full of water. Enough water that the radio did not work for some reason. So I left it floating. And I realized I need to swim back towards the dock. And I need to start now. So I lean back and I start backstroking back towards the dock. Now when you're in the water and only your face is above the surface, 300 to 400 yards looks like miles. Even when it's icy flat the way it was, and I mean icy because the water was cold, but it was so flat. It seems so far away. But I thought, got to do this. And I was thinking, I can't stop. I was aware of what hypothermia could do. Being a camp director there, we'd done our first aid and had training. So I knew I had to get out of the water as quick as I could, but I had to get there to get out. So I'm backstroking. And I'm swimming backwards. And it's not so bad, except I have to stick my head into the water, and the water is so cold up around my head. It's like that brain freeze feeling, except it's my whole head feels that way. And all I know is I got to kick, I can't stop. I got to kick, I can't stop. And I did this, and then I rolled over to see how far I had gone, and I realized it had probably been 30 seconds, and it was still so far away. And there's something so discouraging about that when it's like suddenly you lose track of time. And you don't realize you haven't been in the water that long yet. And when you swim, you don't move very far, very fast. So I'm backstroking. And I tell myself, don't look anymore. Don't look anymore. Look up. Just look up at the sky and try to keep your landmarks. And I was watching clouds, which didn't really help that well because they moved. And I'm backstroking. And I'm starting to get worried because I can feel my legs are getting so cold and starting to cramp up. I can feel it. My feet are already cramping. And I'm just kicking and backstroking and trying not to worry about that. And I start thinking to myself, Newman, you can do this. I know you're only a yellow card, but you can do this. And what I mean by yellow card is this. I was in Boy Scouts. I used to go to Boy Scout camp in the summers from the time I was 12 until 15 when Boy Scouts wasn't cool anymore and girls were more fun. Now, the first thing that happened when you get to Boy Scout camp is you take a swim test. Now, this was at a place called Lake of the Woods in Southern Oregon. It was a cold lake. It was in the Cascade Mountains. Even though it was July, man, it was cold. And I couldn't swim. I could pool swim. I mean, I could dive in, swim to the edge, get out, jump out, dive in. I mean, I could pool swim, but I couldn't swim continuously. I was not a lap swimmer. And I don't know why, but it just never clicked with me, the strokes and everything. So, but I could backstroke. Except at scout camp, you couldn't just backstroke. You had to swim normal for a certain amount of distance, and I could not do it. I ended up dog paddling. So I didn't get a green tag. I would get a yellow tag. And it was a little yellow ring, and it would hang on a hook with my name on it on the swim board where everyone had their swim buddy. And of course, you couldn't swim without your buddy. So my swim buddy was also a yellow tag. He was a kid named Jamie that was about half as tall as me. And what that meant was we couldn't go past the rope in the swim area, which was only 3 feet deep, which was kind of embarrassing. So I didn't even do that. But we couldn't go out in kayaks unless we were with a green tag person. But that meant you had to ask someone, and they didn't want to swim with a yellow tag person because we were no fun. Anyway, it just made camp uncomfortable. I could do rowboats. Rowboats were, I was really good at rowing. And so I was like backstroking. And I remember at camp, we go in for breakfast in the morning, and we always had assigned tables, and we had pitchers on our table with these stainless steel cups, and they were full of prune juice. Now, I don't know why prune juice. Well, I know now. Back then, I just thought, man, this is so gross. Why do they make us drink this? And we had to drink our prune juice before they'd serve us breakfast. It makes sense now, especially at my age. But then the cooks would come out and the kitchen crew. And all the camp staffs there, the different departments, had this song they would sing. And these guys would come out and they would sing this song. They would go, "We are the kitchen crew, stick our fingers in this stew, cook just like your mothers do. I'm telling you, and in your memory, dear to your heart will be, Camp McLaughlin sure to shine all of the time." You notice I can't sing, but I can keep rhythm. So anyway, back to me floating across an ice-cold lake. I'm backstroking. And I'm thinking that thought to myself, I can do this. Doesn't matter if I'm a yellow card. I can do this. I can backstroke. And that song came into my head. So I'm backstroking, and that's the tune in my head. Over and over while I backstroke across this lake that had been covered with ice a few hours before. And my legs start to cramp up. And I can feel it. And suddenly my left leg cramps so bad I can't use it anymore. And the pain is so intense. I'm tearing up, and I can feel the heat from my tears run down out of my eyes because my head is so cold. And then my other leg starts to cramp up. And then I start to get worried. And then I hear my inner voice say, "God, is this how I'm going to die?" Because I was aware of what hypothermia could do. I knew if I couldn't keep swimming, I would probably go hypothermic and just float. So I'm still stroking. My arms are starting to cramp up. And I asked God, is this how I'm going to die? And then he says no in a really strange way. The back of my head slammed against the dock, against the metal post that supported the dock in the lake. And that hurt, but thankfully my head was so cold it didn't hurt that bad. And I realized I was there. And I stroked again, and I rolled over, and that's when I realized I'd been in 3 feet of water for probably the last 30 seconds and didn't know it because I was looking up at the sky. I made it to shore. Yeah, God said no that day. But I realized then I can't stop. I was able to roll over and get on my hands and knees, and the water just under my chin, and crawled up onto the beach. And the sun was out, and part of me wanted to just lay there because I was so exhausted. And then that intelligent part of my brain kicked in with the training and said, "Don't sit still. Don't lay here. Keep moving. Keep moving." Because I still had a long way to go before I got to a building or people or warmth. So I remember crawling up the beach, my head down, and then I ran into the second object, the inflatable water trampoline, a big 15-foot water trampoline. And I was able to grab the rings on the side. I hit near the ladder, and I was able to pull myself up to a standing position, and I could feel my legs starting to function again. And then I realized I'm wearing this heavy polyester fleece sweatshirt, and my life vest was on. And my life vest was a zipper. and it was all I could do. I couldn't even feel the zipper in my fingers, and I was clawing at it trying to get this life vest off because I thought I got to get this ice cold sweatshirt off my body. I get the vest off, and then I thought I got to get the sweatshirt off. So what do? I reach down to the bottom and I pull it up over my head, and that's where it stops. You ever tried to pull a wet garment off of a wet body? It's like trying to put on socks when your feet are still wet when you get out of the shower. It just doesn't work. So I have a heavy sweatshirt over the top of my head and my arms stuck inside of it. And the only way I could see is to bend over and try to look through the opening. I look like some kind of swampy creature now. And remember, I'm old and I'm very white, and it's June and I haven't been exposed to sun. And I think I got to get warm. I got to get this off. I can't get it off. My arms are trapped. So I walk up the hill, stumble up the hill. That's when I realized I only had one shoe on. And I find the trail back to our apartment. I'll pull my arms in. And I'm stumbling through the woods. And I'm just telling myself, don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. I'm stumbling through the woods. I fell down a few times. I was able to get myself back up. And I get to our front door, and my arms are still stuck. And I can't feel the doorknob. So I just start slamming the side of my body into the door. And the door opens, and my wife is standing there in her nightgown with that sleepy look on her face. And she looks at me and she goes, "Why did you go swimming with your clothes on?" She felt bad about that later. Anyway, the thing is, I went in, I ended up stripping down, taking a long shower and getting warm, but it took me, it wiped me out. I slept most of the day. And the lesson I learned from that, besides don't go swimming with your clothes on, I hope no one else ever has to ask that question of God. Is this how I'm going to die? It wasn't that bad. It wasn't like I was fearful. I was just curious. Since then, there was one other time I asked that question too. A few years back, I had a stroke while I was at work. And I can remember laying on the floor, not able to move, and thinking that again. God, is this how I'm going to die? And that time he just said, "No, Newman, this is not how you're going to die." And I took an ambulance ride to the hospital, and by the time I got there, they said there was nothing wrong with me. But I had a stroke. If you've ever had that situation where you've had to ask that question, just know you're not the only one. And I hope you don't ever have to be there. But if you do have to ask God, is this how I'm going to die? I would suggest you figure out now what's going to happen after you die before you have to ask that question. Hey, I'm done for the day. I'll see you next time.